We left off last video just discussing the overall plan for our persistence manager and how we're going to do it. And we finished off with getting this add button tapped function all set up and good to go. So this video, we're going to write our persistence manager. We're going to write 3 functions that we're going to use. And that way in the future video, when we hook everything up, we're good to go. So let's go into our managers folder, open that up, do a command N. It's a new Swift file, and it's going to be called persistence manager.swift. And here, let's create this here. We're going to create it as an enum. And the reason we did an enum and not a struct is just a small minor difference. With a struct, you can initialize an empty struct. It's kind of like a safety thing, super minor difference. But with an enum, you couldn't initialize an empty enum. So persistence manager. And the first thing we want to do is create our instance of user defaults. So static private let defaults equals user defaults dot standard. And this way we don't really have to type user defaults dot standard every time. You'll see when we use it in the future. And the first function we're going to write is the function that actually retrieves the user defaults, right? Because that's the first step we're going to have to do is, before we update the array that we're saving, we have to retrieve that array. So that's going to be the first one we write. So static func retrieve favorites. And this is going to have it's going to be similar to the network call where we're going to have a completion handler and a result type. Because this can fail with an error when we decode. We'll get to that in a second. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Completed at escaping. Again, very, very similar to our network calls. And again, very, very similar. The 2 types here are going to be an array of follower. It's going to be our favorites array, but remember, we're saving a type of follower and a GF error. And then again, this returns void. So that is our function signature, retrieve favorites with a completion handler that, again, we're going to get the result type, which is a success or failure. Upon success, we're going to have our array of follower, which is going to be our favorites array if we got it back. If not, we're going to have a GF error. Again, very, very similar to our network calls. Now, the thing with user defaults and why we're getting into like the encodable, decodable, why we're using this result type with the completion handler is because anytime you're saving a custom object to user defaults, you have to encode it and decode it. It gets saved as data. Whereas if you were just saving an int, a string, a Boolean, something super basic like that, you wouldn't have to do that. User defaults can hold those, no problem. But again, we're saving a custom object, this follower array. So that's why we have to go through this. So let's try to retrieve it here. We do guard let favorites data, because again, it's going to be data equal defaults. So this is where we're accessing our defaults. And then it's dot object for key. And you see it's going to be a string. Now, when you save something into user defaults, you have to give it an identifier, which is a key. And again, and it's a string. So we'll call ours favorites. But now again, you're going to see this stringly type stuff. Hopefully this, rings alarms here. So we're going to create an enum to hold our constants essentially. So enum keys, and we'll do static let favorites equal, and we'll cut and paste this. Cut, paste, there we go. Now for object for keys, we're going to do keys.favorites. And because we're going to be reusing this throughout our user defaults. So we don't want to have to retype the string every time. So that's what we did here by putting it in a constant. So basically what we're saying here is let's pull favorites data. It's going to be the object for key. Basically whatever is at the key favorites, that's what we're going to pull up. Except if you notice, let me rewrite this again. So defaults.object for key. If you notice, it's an any here. Basically what that means is like Swift knows there's an object there, but it doesn't know like what type of object it is. So we have to cast it as data. We have to tell it like, hey, this is data. So object for key, and again, it's keys.favorites, and then as data, this is us casting it. We're saying, hey, Swift, this is data. Else, this is where we're going to, we're not going to return an error here, because basically if this is nil, this means we've never saved anything to favorites before. It's kind of like the first time use. So we don't want to return an error, right? Just because there's no favorites ever in there. So we're going to return an empty array. So we're going to call completed. Completed. And completed takes in a success case dot success And instead of giving it an array of followers, we're going to send back an empty array. Because again, this is the example of the very first time you're ever trying to access this. So here's your empty array of followers. And then we want to return. So now that we have our favorites data, again, provided it's not nil, now we can do our do, try, catch to decode this. Again, remember when it's in user defaults, we had to encode it. So now we need to decode it into our follower array. And this is going to be, again, very similar to our network manager. So let's go to the network manager. Here where we're creating a decoder and we're decoding it, it's the same process. So let's actually copy and paste this do, try, catch, copy, and then persistence manager. Paste it there because it's the same thing, except decoding strategy, we don't need to convert from snake case, right? Because we're no longer dealing with like server stuff, but it is the same code, and I'll run through it real quick. So we create our decoder, our JSON decoder. We don't, again, need to do any convert from snake case or anything like that. Let followers, let's use the proper name here. Let favorites equals try. We're going to decode it. We want to decode it into an array of followers, same thing, except the data we're decoding it from is not data, it's favorites data that we got up here, right? So copy that, paste that favorites data in there, and completed, we want to send in through, whoops, if it's completed, we want to say success, good to go, and send up the array of favorites, which we just decoded here on line 28. Send that through to the result type for the success case. Again, hopefully this is all review. This is the same stuff we did in our network call. And now the catch, if it tries to decode the data and it can't decode it, there's an error, it goes into the catch case, and we don't want to pass invalid data. We want to be a little more specific. We want to say like unable to favorite. So here in our utilities, we have our GF error. We're going to add a couple more error messages. Case unable to favorite. There was an error favoriting this user. Please try again. Again, maybe not, I'm not the best at writing error messages, but you can write whatever you want in here. So, and then back in persistence manager, that's what we want to return. We don't want to return invalid data. Do command B to get the autocomplete. We want to do dot unable to favorite. So that's the error we're going to pass back through our result type in the failure case. So this is our retrieve favorites function. Let me walk through it again real quick. Again, repetition is the key. We are going to call retrieve favorites. It's going to return a result type. In the success case, it's going to be an array of followers, which is our array of favorites, or an error. So this first section here, we're reaching into user defaults and seeing what we have. Again, in the first use case, if there's nothing there, it's going to return nil. And in that case, we're going to return a blank array because it's like the first time using it. If there is something in there, we're going to get that data as favorites data, and then we're going to use our decodable, codable stuff to decode that data into an array of followers, and then we're going to return that through the success case of the result type as our array of followers that's also called favorites. If not, we're going to send the error of unable to favorite through the failure case of the result type. So that's retrieving the array. Now let's work on saving the array. Remember I said there's multiple steps here. So now we want to save favorites. So down here, static func save favorites, and that is an array of follower. And this is actually going to return a GF error because, again, when we're saving it, now we're encoding it. Remember when we were retrieving it, we're decoding it from data. When we save our array of followers to user defaults, we need to encode it into data. And just like when we're decoding up here, it has the possibility of catching and failing in the encoding process. So that's why we're going to return a GF error, which is going to be an optional because it could be nil, right? If the save goes successfully good, we're going to return nil as the GF error. So similar to the decoding, it's going to, well, let's return here, return nil, just for now, just to get Xcode to stop giving me errors. So we need a do, try, catch, very similar to the decoder. So do, and we're going to say let encoder, not decoder, encoder equal JSON encoder. Make sure you pick the right one there. And then we do let encoded favorites equal encoder dot encode, and then the value is, we have to put a try in front of it, try encoder dot encode, and the value is going to be favorites that we passed in here on line 36. And you see we get the error that says errors thrown from here are not handled. we have to handle that in the catch block, right? So just type our catch, and we need to, in this point, return, whoops. Remember, we're returning a GF error. So if this encode fails, we're going to return .unable to favorite. Again, the same thing we did up here. So now we have our encoded favorites if it was successful. So now what we need to do is save that to the user defaults. So to do that, we do defaults.set value of type any for key string. So you see it's very similar up here to object for key where we were retrieving the object. Well, now we're setting the object. So set encoded favorites. Remember the C, it's of type data. You can see we've already encoded it there. Encoded favorites for key. Remember I said we were going to reuse this keys dot favorites, right? So that's how you know what you're getting. Whatever string you save it as, essentially, that's what you're going to pull from when you retrieve the favorites. And then here we want to return nil. We're returning nil, right? Because we're returning a GF error. So basically in this do, if this all goes well, we're returning nil because there's no GF error. However, if it doesn't work out, right, something goes wrong with the encoding, we're going to return unable to favorite. And then we can get rid of this return nil down here, which was our kind of temporary get Xcode to shut up error. Clean this up a bit. So here you see we have our save and retrieve are very, very similar, right? When we're saving the favorites, we're encoding it as data, saving that data into user defaults. And then when we're retrieving, we're just retrieving that data and decoding that data into an array of followers. All right, so now that we have like the two main building blocks here, now we need to write the function that kind of combines all these. And it's gonna take in one of the parameters. We need to know whether we're adding or removing, right? So we can act accordingly. So we're going to create an enum to handle that. We'll create that up here above the persistence manager. Enum, we're going to call it persistence action type because it's going to be if case add or remove, right? That way we can pass this in and we'll know whether we're adding or removing. And you'll see how this all ties together once we actually use this here in a little bit. But we're building the foundation here. So the function here is going to be static func update with, and we want to pass in a favorite, which the favorite is going to be of type follower, not an array, right? This is where we're actually favoriting the one individual. So we're going to update that with the follower, and then action type is going to be of type persistence action type. That's what we just created up here on line 11 and 12. So here in the function, we're going to pass in .add or .remove so we can act accordingly. And then this will have a completion handler as well, because we need to know, like, again, remember when we're adding or removing, we can get errors if the data doesn't get encoded properly. So we want to have a completion handler that will send back an error if that does happen, so we can present our error messages on our view controller. So that completion handler is going to be at escaping again, at escaping, and it's going to be a GF error. And again, it can be nil, can be an optional, and this returns void. And give us our curly braces here. We'll make this smaller so that fits in a little bit better. So again, to repeat that, we're going to be able to call update with. We're going to pass in our follower, and then we're going to say, hey, we're either adding or removing, and it's going to complete with an error if all doesn't go well. So let's start writing this function. So the first thing we need to do, remember, regardless whether we're adding or removing, we need to reach into user defaults and retrieve the array so we can update it. So luckily we have a function for that here called retrieve favorites. So let's call that retrieve favorites, and you see we get the completion handler here, and it's just a result. Again, very, very similar to the network call here, result. And anytime you get a result, right, you want to switch on that result because you're going to get a case.success and let favorite, again, just to keep the naming here, favorites, and we'll put a break in there for now just so Xcode doesn't yell at us, case.failure, and let error, and a break. And again, remember, that is this retrieve favorites function where we're either going to get our array of followers or the error based on, you know, all this code we did down here. So let's handle the failure case first, because that's pretty simple. So if we fail here, we're going to call completed, and we're going to pass in the error. Right, so remember this is the completion handler up here that is going to pass back a GF error. So if things fail, we're just going to pass back the error that we passed through that result type earlier. The success case, where we actually get our favorites, this is going to be a bit more involved. So let's work on that. Now this favorites variable that we get here, this is going to be immutable. However, we need to either add or remove from our array. So we need to create kind of a temporary array here. So it's that var retrieved favorites equals favorites. So basically I'm just kind of creating a new array that is equal to the one we get back, because by making this a var, I can mutate this. I can add items to it, I can remove from it, and that's what we need to do. So now we need to switch based on our action type, right? Because we're either going to be adding or removing. So here, switch action type, and then the case is .add, or the case is .remove. And again, we'll put breaks in here just so we don't get the Xcode errors. So now we need to act accordingly on retrieve favorites, whether we're either adding our favorite or removing our favorite. We're going to handle both those cases. So the first thing we want to do in our add case here, let's give us some space here, is if you think about it, right, we don't want to add a favorite if that favorite already exists, right? If we've already added sallen0400 to our favorites, we don't want to add that again. So let's check for that. So guard not retrieved favorites dot contains, and you can see we can get the contains element. So we're going to see contains favorite that we pass in here. That's the favorite that we passed in up here as the parameter up on line 25. So we're going to make sure that this doesn't contain our favorite already. And if it does contain the favorite, we're going to call completed, and we're going to pass back an error type, right? Well, we'll put invalid data for now, but let's go to our errors. We're going to create a new one. So gf error, let's put case already in favorites and say, you've already favorited this user. You must really like them. Okay, so that's our have fun with your error messages, type whatever you want in there. Or if you're actually doing a take-home project, be serious about it. So back to our persistence manager. So now instead of passing back completed.invalid data, we're gonna pass back already, again, Command B, get some autocomplete action, already in favorites. I did not spell that right in my error here. Already in favorites. There we go. Back to persistence manager. There we go. Command B, make sure that's all good. And then we want to return, right? Once we show that error, we're done. We want to return out of here. So that's our check to make sure like our favorite doesn't already exist. So if that favorite doesn't already exist, now we just need to append that favorite to our array. So retrieved favorites dot append new element favorite. So we're just going to throw that favorite into that array. And that's all we're doing actually for the add case, right? Add case is good to go. So let's work on the remove case. So basically we need to go through the array and remove all instances where these followers match. So we can do that. We can do retrieved favorites dot remove all, and not just remove all. We want to do remove all wherever that is. There it is. Wow, this is way down here. Remove all where, and then you can put in a closure here to make sure it matches. Again, I like to use the shorthand closures here. So let's get rid of this. And then again, it's very simple. $0. Remember, $0 is each item as it's iterating through. I always put the dot in front of it. $0 dot login. Remember, this is a follower object. Our follower object has an avatar URL or a login. We're going to compare the logins. So equals favorite dot login. And that favorite is again, this favorite that we passed in here on line 25. So basically we're iterating through that array. Anywhere the login equals the favorite login, that's where we're going to remove it. So just that one simple line of code will go through and remove any instance of the username that we're trying to remove. So again, we're only doing this when we're removing that. This is when we're going to do the swipe to delete on the table view. So that's what's going to happen here. So again, to walk through this real quick, in our add, we're taking care of that. We're checking to make sure it's not already there. Then we add it. And if not, we remove all instances of it. So now that we've either added or removed accordingly, now we just need to save our array back into user defaults. Remember, like I said, we retrieve it, we update it, either add or remove, and then we save it again. So in that case, we can call completed. And remember, this completed is either going to return, it's going to return a GF error, either nil or an error. Well, if you remember, our save function here is either going to return, it's going to return nil upon a successful save that we did here, or it's going to return a GF error upon any failures. So here in the completed, we can call that function save favorite, or favorites, right? We want to save the whole array that it takes in there. So again, the completed is either going to be, if the save went successful, we're going to complete it with a nil. And if the save was unsuccessful, it's going to be completed with the GF error, and we're going to pass up that error. So that is our update with function. Again, you're going to see this in action in the next video, where we update it with our favorite. We either say, hey, we're going to add or remove it. And then, like you said, we acted accordingly. When we added it, check to make sure it's not already in there. Then we add it here. If we're removing it, we're removing all instances of it. And then we save it back to user defaults. Done deal. So that is our persistence manager. Again, we have the building blocks of save and retrieve. And then here in this update with, we put those building blocks together, acting accordingly, whether we're either adding or removing. So let's put all this together in the next video and see how this works.